General George Kenney had a problem. One of his best young pilots kept buzzing the Golden Gate Bridge. He looped his fighter around the Statue of Liberty at low altitude, and on one memorable afternoon over San Francisco, he flew so low across a suburban street that he blew a woman's laundry clean off her clothesline. The pilot was Richard Bong. He was 21 years old. He came from a small Wisconsin farm, and he could not stop doing insane things in an airplane. Kenney didn't court-martial him. Instead, he made Bong wash the woman's laundry by hand. Then he sent him to the Pacific. By the end of the war, Dick Bong had 40 confirmed aerial kills. More than any American pilot in any war before or since. This is the story of how he did it. To understand Richard Bong, you have to understand the country that produced him. He was born on September 24, 1920, in Superior, Wisconsin. His father was a Swedish immigrant who had come to America for farmland and found it. The family settled near the small town of Poplar, on a quiet stretch of dairy country in the far northern corner of the state. Winters were long. Summers were short. The land asked for everything you had. Richard was the oldest of 9 children. He milked cows before sunrise. He cut firewood. He helped raise the younger ones. By every account from people who knew him then, he was the easiest kid in the family. Quiet, steady. He didn't argue. He didn't brag. He just did the work. But he watched the sky. In the late 1930s, the air over rural Wisconsin had begun to fill with a new sound. Mail planes, crop dusters, occasionally a military trainer on a long cross-country flight. Bong would stop whatever chore he was doing and stand in the field, head back, watching until the dot disappeared. His father noticed. His mother noticed. They didn't say much about it. Farm families don't. He went to Superior State Teachers College in 1938. He took a civilian pilot training course offered through the federal government. The first time he flew an airplane, the instructor said he had never seen anything like it. The kid had hands. He had eyes. He had timing the way some people are born with perfect pitch. In May of 1941, with the world already on fire and the United States edging closer to the war, Richard Bong enlisted in the United States Army Air Corps. He shipped out to flight school in California. He flew the At-6 Texan. He flew the P-38 Lightning when it was still brand new and still terrifying to half the men sent up in it. The P-38 had 2 engines, 2 booms, a central pod for the pilot and the guns. It was fast. It was heavy. It was unforgiving. Pilots called it the fork-tail devil. And in Bong's hands, almost from the first hour, it became something else. He pinned on his wings on January 9, 1942. He was 21 years old. Then came the laundry incident, and several others like it. Bong was a magnificent pilot and a terrible disciplinary case. Kenney could have buried him. Instead, Kenney saw what he had, and made a decision that would change the air war in the Pacific. He had no idea what was waiting for him out there. In September of 1942, Second Lieutenant Richard Bong stepped off a transport at Port Moresby, New Guinea, and into a war that almost no one back home understood. The Pacific theater was not the European theater. There were no friendly French villages. There were no rolling fields of England. There were jungle, and more ocean. Airfields were carved out of swamp by exhausted engineers. Mosquitoes carried malaria. Mud swallowed boots. The Japanese held a chain of bases stretching from Rabaul down through the Solomons and across New Guinea, and they had been holding them for nearly a year. Bong was assigned to the 9th Fighter Squadron of the 49th Fighter Group, part of General Kenney's 5th Air Force V Fighter Command. The 49th had been in combat since the dark days after Pearl Harbor. They'd flown obsolete P-40s against Zeros and lived to tell about it. They were tough. They were salty. They didn't have a lot of patience for hot dog rookies from Wisconsin. Bong shut up. He watched. He listened. He flew his wing position the way it was supposed to be flown. And on December 27, 1942, near a small Allied airstrip at Dobadura on the New Guinea coast, he got his chance. A Japanese strike force came in low over the field. Zeros for cover. Val dive bombers underneath. Bong's flight took off into the middle of it. He shot down 2 Zeros and a Val that day. 3 confirmed kills. On a single mission. 22 years old. That was the moment the men in the squadron stopped seeing him as a kid and started seeing him as something else. The P-38 in his hands began to do things the engineers at Lockheed had never quite imagined. Bong understood the airplane the way a violinist understands a violin. He used the twin engines for asymmetric power tricks no one had taught him. He understood that the Lightning's nose-mounted guns, 450s and a 20mm cannon, all firing along the same axis, could deliver an absolutely lethal cone of fire if you got close enough. And here is the strange part. Here is the part that nobody who hadn't flown with him quite believed. Richard Bong was, on paper, a poor marksman. His gunnery scores in training had been mediocre. His deflection shooting was below average. He could not consistently hit a target at long range, and he knew it. So he made a decision. He decided that he would simply close the distance until missing was impossible. He flew right up the tailpipes of Japanese fighters. He crowded them. He pressed his attacks until other pilots in his flight thought he was going to ram. Sometimes he did ram in a sense. He came home with chunks of Japanese aircraft buried in his wings. Oil from his victims streaked across his canopy. Debris dings across the leading edges. He once flew through an enemy plane's disintegrating fuselage and landed with parts of it still wedged in his airframe. His squadron mates started calling him the closest thing the air war had to a knife fighter. There is a famous gun camera frame from one of his engagements over Wewak. The Japanese fighter fills the screen edge to edge. You cannot see the tail. You cannot see the nose. You cannot see anything except a wing and a fuselage and the inside of someone's last bad day. Bong was, by his own later admission in interviews, that close on most of his kills. Close enough that debris was a regular danger. Close enough that he flew home with bullet holes in his own canopy from rounds that had passed through the airplane he was killing. Through 1943, his kill count climbed steadily. A 0 in January. Pair of Oscars in March. Tony in July. He was promoted. He was promoted again. He flew so many combat hours that the flight surgeons began to worry openly that he was going to crack from fatigue. He didn't. He just kept flying. The squadron rotated through new airfields as the front pushed north. Dobadura, Nadzab, Finschhafen, Hollandia. The names ran together. The missions ran together. Wake, brief, walk to the airplane, climb in, take off into a green coastline and a blue ocean and find the Japanese formation somewhere over either one. Engage, disengage. Come home with empty ammunition cans and a wet flight suit. Eat, sleep if you could. Do it again. There was a rivalry building. Another young American pilot named Tommy McGuire had arrived in theater. McGuire was talented, ambitious, and aggressive in a way that bordered on reckless even by Bong's standards. He flew with the 475th Fighter Group, just up the road. He counted Bong's kills the way a baseball fan counts home runs. Every time Bong scored, McGuire scored harder. Every time McGuire pulled within striking distance, Bong added another notch. It was a friendly rivalry. Mostly, the two men respected each other enormously. They drank together when they could. But the numbers mattered, and they both knew it. By late 1943, Richard Bong was on his way to a number that the Army Air Forces had begun watching very, very carefully. Eddie Rickenbacker, the American ace of aces from World War I. 26 confirmed kills over France in 1918. A national hero. A name carved into American memory like a name on a war memorial. 26 was the record. 26 was the wall. Bong reached his 25th kill on November 5, 1943. He reached his 26th on April 12, 1944. He'd tied Rickenbacker. The next morning's papers in the United States ran the story above the fold. A farm kid from Wisconsin had matched a legend. General Kenny sent him a personal telegram. General Hap Arnold, chief of the Army Air Forces in Washington, sent a personal telegram. Richard's mother and father read about it in the Superior newspaper before Richard could even write home. The Army pulled him off combat duty. He was, as Kenny said later, simply too valuable now. Too much of a symbol. Too much had been invested in his survival. He was rotated stateside in early 1944 for a war bond tour and a long scheduled rest. He hated it. He gave speeches. He shook hands with mayors. He sat for photographs with starlets. He did the thing every combat veteran sent home for propaganda has ever done. He wore the uniform, smiled the right smile, and quietly went out of his mind. But something happened on that trip home that mattered. Something that would put a name on the most famous P-38 in the entire Pacific War. He went back to Wisconsin. And in Superior, at a homecoming event, he met a young woman named Marjorie Vitendel. Marge was a college student. She was bright, funny, and pretty in the way of girls in old yearbook photos. Bong fell instantly. Whatever had been hard and locked down inside him for 2 years of combat, whatever he hadn't been able to talk about with anybody, softened around Marge. He carried her photograph with him everywhere from that point on. He wrote her letters constantly. He proposed before he shipped back out. When he returned to the Pacific in September of 1944, he had a new airplane. And on the nose of that P-38, in big white letters with her face painted underneath, was a single word: Marge. He went back officially as a gunnery instructor. Now, about that title. The Army's stated reason for sending Major Richard Bong back to the Pacific was that he would teach younger pilots how to shoot. He would lecture. He would demonstrate. He would not, technically, fly combat missions. In practice, every time a real mission came up, Major Bong somehow ended up flying it. He flew with the 9th. He flew with the 80th. He flew with anybody who'd let him on the schedule. He kept telling his commanders he was just demonstrating proper closing technique. They kept letting him go up. Because here is the thing they all understood. The man with the highest kill count in the entire United States Army Air Forces was not going to teach gunnery from a chalkboard. He was going to teach it the way he had learned it. From 80 yards behind a Japanese fighter with the gun camera running. And the worst part of this story hadn't even started yet. Because in October of 1944, the entire Pacific War was about to converge on a place called Leyte Gulf. The American return to the Philippines began on October 20th, 1944. MacArthur waded ashore at Leyte. The promise he had made 2.5 years earlier, "I shall return," was kept on a beach with cameras rolling and Japanese mortar fire still falling. Overhead, the air war reached a pitch the Pacific had not yet seen. The Japanese threw everything they had left into Leyte. Conventional fighters from Luzon. Land-based bombers from Formosa. The first organized kamikaze attacks in history. The skies over the invasion fleet were dense with aircraft, smoke, and burning fuel. Major Richard Bong was there. His tally stood at 28 kills when the campaign opened. By the end of October, it stood higher. By November, higher still. He flew almost every day. He flew tired. He flew through weather that grounded other pilots. On October 27th, he shot down an Oscar over Tacloban airfield. The fight was short. He closed inside 50 yards. His guns hammered. The Japanese fighter rolled and went straight in. On November 10th, he shot down a Tony in a slashing pass across a formation of escorts. The Tony's wing came off. The pilot did not get out. On November 11th, he scored 2 more. By December 7th, 3 years to the day after Pearl Harbor, his official count stood at 38. The men in his squadron had stopped trying to count. They just watched. General Kenny watched too. And Kenny was getting nervous. Because here is what nobody wants to say out loud in a war. Every veteran pilot, no matter how good, eventually flies the mission he doesn't come back from. Statistics catch up. Luck runs out. Kenny had seen it happen to better men than himself 100 times. He was going to lose Bong. He could feel it. So he made a decision. he decided to stage a Medal of Honor ceremony, and he was going to have it done right there on a forward airfield while the campaign was still active with Japanese aircraft still capable of attacking the field. Because if Kenny waited, if he sent Bong home and held the ceremony at the Pentagon, he was afraid he'd be pinning the medal on a coffin. The ceremony was held on December 12, 1944, at Tacloban Airstrip on Leyte. The pierced steel planking still soft from recent rain. The wreckage of Japanese aircraft pushed off to the side of the strip and not yet hauled away. American fighters parked in revetments around the perimeter. General Douglas MacArthur came down personally. The citation was read aloud. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action above and beyond the call of duty. For voluntarily flying combat missions while assigned to a non-combat instructional role. For destroying 8 enemy aircraft during the period in question. For setting the standard, in the words of the citation, by which all others would be measured. MacArthur pinned the medal on Bong's chest. Then MacArthur did something not often quoted in the history books, but witnessed by the men standing on that airstrip. He held the salute a beat longer than ceremony required. And he said, loud enough for the assembled crews to hear, Major Bong, who has ruled the air from New Guinea to the Philippines, I now induct you into the society of the bravest of the brave, the wearers of the Medal of Honor of the United States. Later that day, away from the cameras, MacArthur told the press that Bong was simply the greatest aviator in the world. Bong's face, in the photographs from that ceremony, is the face of a tired farm kid. He is 24 years old. He looks older. He looks like a man who has flown 200 combat missions and has stopped pretending it hasn't cost him anything. He flew 2 more combat missions after the ceremony. He shot down 2 more Japanese aircraft. A pair of Oscars on December 17, 1944, near Mindoro. That brought his official confirmed total to 40. And that was the moment Kenny made the second decision. He grounded him. For real this time. No more instructor missions. No more demonstrations. The orders came down through the chain. Major Richard Ira Bong was rotated stateside, permanently, effective immediately, by direct order. Bong flew home in January of 1945. He had achieved a number that no American pilot has matched in the 80 years since. He went home to Marge. They were married on February 10, 1945, in Superior, Wisconsin, in a ceremony so packed that people stood in the aisles and on the church steps. The whole town turned out. The press from Milwaukee and Minneapolis came up. Newsreels rolled. Marge was 21. Richard was 24. For a few weeks, they had something almost like a normal life. Then the Army gave him his next assignment. He was reassigned to test pilot duty. First to Wright Field in Ohio. Then, by the summer of 1945, to the Lockheed plant in Burbank, California. The aircraft he was testing was a brand new machine, the first American operational jet fighter, the P-80 Shooting Star. The P-80 was the future. Single engine. No propeller. A turbojet pushing the airframe past 400 miles an hour in level flight. American engineers were racing to get it into production before the war ended. Before the Germans fielded more Me-262s, before the next war started without it. Bong test flew it through July and into early August. He told Marge he was nervous about the airplane. He didn't usually say things like that. He said the fuel system was finicky. He said it didn't feel right on takeoff sometimes. She wrote it down in a letter. She kept the letter for the rest of her life. On the morning of August 6, 1945, Major Richard Ira Bong climbed into a P-80 at Lockheed Air Terminal in Burbank for a routine acceptance flight. The aircraft lifted off the runway. It climbed maybe 200 feet. Then the engine flamed out. The cause, identified later by the accident board, was a failure in the main fuel pump. With the pump out, the auxiliary should have engaged. It didn't, possibly because Bong, in the seconds available to him, was occupied with simply trying to keep the airplane flying long enough to clear the houses below him. He could have ejected. The P-80 was equipped and he had time barely. But the airplane was over a residential neighborhood in North Hollywood. Houses, children's bedrooms, a narrow street. He stayed with it. He banked away from a row of houses. He cleared a school. The shooting star came down on a residential street and exploded. He was 24 years old. That same morning, on the other side of the world, the B-29 Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. The next morning's papers carried the news of Hiroshima in screaming headlines. Bong's death was on the inside pages, sometimes a single column. America's greatest fighter pilot had been pushed off the front page by the weapon that would end the war. Japan surrendered 9 days later, on August 15, 1945. Marge was in Superior when the telegram came. She was 21 years old, married for less than 6 months, and she was a widow. She lived another 98 years. She remarried. She had a family. She spent decades quietly defending her first husband's memory and writing about him whenever a young historian asked. She died in 2003. The decorations Richard Bong was awarded read like the index of a war. The Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, 7 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 15 Air Medals. The Air Force named an air base after him in California. The state of Wisconsin named a state recreation area after him. The town of Poplar named a stretch of Highway 13 after him. In Superior, there is a museum dedicated to him today. The Richard I Bong Veterans Historical Center stands on the waterfront. A restored P-38 sits inside it, painted in the markings of the airplane named Marge, with her photograph on the nose, exactly as it flew in 1944. A monument stands near the crash site in North Hollywood. A small plaque on a quiet street, naming the young pilot who steered his failing aircraft past the houses he could have crashed into. The 40-kill record has stood for 80 years. Modern air combat is a different thing entirely. Beyond visual range missiles, stealth, data links, the conditions that allowed a young pilot in a propeller fighter to roll up that kind of total close-range gun engagements, day after day, in a target-rich theater against a determined and skilled enemy air force, those conditions will almost certainly never exist again. Richard Bong is the all-time American ace. He will probably hold that title forever. He didn't talk much. He didn't swagger. He didn't make speeches when he didn't have to. When the Army made him tour the country in 1944, he did it because he was told to, and then he found every possible way to get back into a cockpit. He flew because he loved flying. He fought because his country was at war. He came home because they made him. He went up in the P-80 because somebody had to. A farm boy from Poplar, Wisconsin. The eldest of 9. A man who carried his fiancée's photograph on the nose of his fighter and brought it through 200 missions. The greatest fighter pilot the United States ever produced. 40 kills. A record that has stood for 80 years. Subscribe. One more story like this every week. Next time. A U.S. Marine Corps officer who held a hilltop in Korea against 3 Chinese divisions for 2 nights with a single rifle company. No air support, and snow up to his knees.